Hello to all my pre-authorization princesses and deductible daddies. I just thought I'd record a very quick video really responding to the response and just the whole United healthcare situation that has been playing out over the last few days. I've got to go to work pretty soon, so I've got a little bit early to the hospital car park to look like a crazy person talking to my phone. I was going to record a few thoughts the other day, but then the news broke that they've caught the suspect, Luigi Mangione, who was discovered in McDonald's. McDonald's, of all places, you know, the guy being venerated as a kind of anti-capitalist, anti-corporate, anti-authority Robin Hoodie, was taken down in the end by his love for Starbucks, initially, and then McDonald's. I mean, talk about the most basic possible tastes. But I guess, you know, we all have our weaknesses, and he was at least in there for breakfast, which is mildly defensible. But yes, he's been caught, and I thought I'd just give it a couple more days just to digest what's going on. But this is kind of off the cuff. It's the second off the cuff video I've made in quick succession, but they're kind of thematically linked. I posted a video the other day after a long hiatus, just responding to the healthcare situation in America, talking a little bit about that, just touching on some of the problems, not all of it, but kind of asking how someone like RFK Jr. has come to the fore because of the sort of dire situation of health. And, you know, again, this is a sort of notable thing that's happened related. So I just thought I'd record, but I'm not becoming a commentary channel, and I'm not a news channel either. So I'm not going to go through a sort of blow by blow of the whole situation. But yes, he was taken down not only by his love for corporate junk food, and no wonder he's interested in health if that's the kind of food he eats, but also it seems by flirting when he revealed his face. And I think, you know, all the men watching will understand that, you know, being horny is a pre-existing medical condition, so fair enough. But the response was really what I found shocking. You know, I really was kind of taken aback by it. I'm an outside observer. I'm not in the US, obviously, but I follow healthcare there quite closely. I'm interested in it. I have many friends in America. I love America. I like going there. But it's a crazy situation. And I, even for me as somebody with a dark sense of humor, even for a doctor, I was just blown away by the memes. It was a meme pandemic. I'm kind of hardwired into the medical meme community, and I've never seen anything like it. It united the left and the right after this polarizing election, and it was a murder. It was a murder of a middle-aged guy, a father, and it provoked, let's be honest, kind of sheer glee. Now, I'm a licensed medical professional. I'm not going to sit here and condone murder. Killing somebody is wrong. Ending somebody's life against their will prematurely is wrong. And I think that's the exact understanding that people are applying also to the insurance companies. Now, Brian Thompson was not the engineer of the entire system. He was not the guy that created modern American healthcare, but he was CEO of a company that is, let's be clear, it is an evil company. I mean, it's not being mischaracterized. These are some of the things that were mentioned in Mangione's kind of manifesto. It's more just like a short confession note, if you like. But he did talk about United Healthcare being, he described them as parasites and things like that. And I think that's a sentiment shared by a lot of people. But he described them as I think he had written the fourth largest company in America, publicly traded company. And I think that's a metric I've seen by some metric. The enormous company, 370 plus billion revenue, I think, and they have a rejection rate for claims double that of the norm. So they are, you know, really typify some of the worst aspects of American healthcare, and they've been in hot water. The CEO himself for using insider trading for him, but using AI systems which are known to have a higher rejection rate. And I think that's just indicative of the kind of faceless, emotionless, cold interaction that a lot of Americans have with their insurance companies. And I think those of us outside America kind of you know, a lot of companies have insurance systems, but they just work way better. So they think, you know, well, if you pay, you'll get a good service. But that's not the case in America, because even if you're on a high level of insurance and you pay and you do everything right, you can still get completely shafted through no fault of your own. You know, this kind of capitalist mantra, this rejection of any kind of aspect of socialist thinking or socialized medicine, leads people to be completely blinded to other options. So I guess that's my role as somebody outside of America. Americans talk about the UK as having a dysfunctional system, and I work in it, and I agree, it's not functioning well at the moment. But the UK is another extreme. We've had a criminally underfunded healthcare system for about 15 years. It wasn't always like this. When I graduated, which was just before the deterioration started happening, correlation is not causation, by the way, the NHS wasn't doing so badly, and it actually scored very highly in terms of value and quality of care. But it is unusual because it's completely free at the point of access. There is no insurance component at all in the UK. But Americans and British people also, when discussing problems with our health system, talk about America as the only other option. And both countries forget that the rest of the world exists. You know, there are countries like Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, Germany, France, Sweden, many more, that have much better healthcare systems. Singapore, that's another extremely effective one. But Singapore isn't maybe not so applicable to large countries, but some of the other countries that I mentioned are. And we Americans don't, they don't even want to attempt to rein in the unregulated, restricted capitalism that is inherent to the model. Now, that can be great if you're, buying an iPhone, but when it comes to healthcare, it is different. I've strayed a little bit from what I was planning to say. I made a couple of notes here, but that was a little bit of a backdrop about United Healthcare as a company, and how they genuinely are evil. And so I think that explains the kind of backlash, the response, which was incredibly unsympathetic to the murder of a man who, again, nobody deserves to die. But it's raised these philosophical questions, things like, is an act of violence only something perpetrated with a gun or with fists, or is an act of violence equally the restriction of life-saving treatment for somebody, or the delaying as their illness progresses, or extracting so much money from someone through no fault of their own. This is again where the kind of capitalist framework falls down, because you can't just these are not things that people do through fault of their own. Nobody should be blamed for their health, particularly if you think of examples like somebody having a cardiac arrest and then being taken in an ambulance to a hospital that's out of network. How could they have changed that? They're unconscious. There was a high-profile thing. It was unrelated. The timing was just kind of very coincidental, of Blue Cross Blue Shield, another insurance company, saying that they would no longer fund operations that run over an allotted time. Now, as somebody who does, high-risk procedures, or even just, regular procedures, they sometimes go longer. That's not my fault. That's not the team's fault. It's definitely not the patient's fault. These things happen. This is human biology. It is not something that can be, conveniently time-stamped like this. And they said they won't fund it. And what's a patient going to do? They're going to wake up in the middle of their operation and say, actually, I can't afford the rest of this. I'm going to head off. This is the insanity behind the system. And the stories that have come out in the last few days have been horrifying. I'm someone who follows American healthcare quite closely, even though I'm not in the US. Many of my friends are. I enjoyed the US. I like going there. I want it to be better. I want the people there to get better healthcare. And oh my gosh, the stories have shocked even me. Horrendous stuff. I'm sure you can find it. But maybe some good will come out of this. The Blue Cross Blue Shield thing that they announced about cutting short anesthesia and operations, they U-turned, but I think only in Connecticut. So I think a lot of people have been kind of wringing their hands about the kind of black humor. Now, you've got to understand that medical professionals in particular, we've always used kind of dark humor. Doctors can post little kind of witticisms and for a sensible chuckle. But when it comes to really scathing, cutting memes, nurses are undefeated. They are the world champions, particularly intensive care and emergency department nurses, in my opinion. And, you know, we've just seen it explode, but it's also been the public that's been sort of posting memes. Because when you leave a people feeling powerless, what do they have left except their anger and laughter as a coping mechanism? So I don't know if we'll see any more incidents like this again, and the corresponding, and when I'm incidents, I mean, you know, I don't know we'll see more murders. Of course, I hope not. And the memes afterwards, but that is what people feel left with. And I think it all started, it kind of reminds me of these late stage capitalism memes that I guess we kind of first started seeing after the 2008 crash, where there was this feeling, this perception, and the younger members of the audience watching may not remember. It was a really horrible time. You know, people lost everything, some people. And there was the feeling a few years down the line that the bankers did this. They were bailed out. They didn't see any repercussions. None of us felt like anybody actually saw any repercussions for it. And the normal people suffered the repercussions. Then the pandemic happened more recently, and that saw an enormous transfer of wealth from the bottom 98% to the top 2%. The billionaire class enriched themselves like no other time in history. They saw their fortunes grow while the rest of us struggled. So this is just, you know, I guess the bubbling over. And that doesn't justify murder at all, but it's kind of, you know, raised a lot of these questions, and I hope that conversation continues. So, you know, people sort of ask why Americans should demonstrate empathy for a healthcare system that clearly doesn't demonstrate any empathy for them. You know, is systematic abuse of power inevitable when human lives are reduced to numbers on a screen? When these insurance companies, you know, particularly using AI, Cigna was also investigated for this, as well as United Healthcare, they're just numbers on a screen, and it becomes easier to you know, you just think about atrocities committed through history when they're just numbers balanced against other numbers, and those other numbers have monetary values attached to them. So is it an inevitable consequence of producing a system like this? I talked a bit about, you know, the comparisons of violence with fists and guns against violence committed with spreadsheets, but, you know, I think we're familiar, talking of the credit crunch, familiar with the concept of comparing theft, like stealing a wallet. Is that different to stealing somebody's livelihood with a pen? And we talk about corporate theft, but when the corporation is in the business of health, is that not even more egregious? Is that not an act of violence? And again, another thing it reminded me of is kind of the focus on one death, which of course in this case was Brian Thompson's, versus the more abstract death of thousands caused by insurance companies, is almost analogous to the kind of very understandable, I'm not judging this, very understandable focus on, saying, delaying ambulances when climate protesters block a street, which I fully understand. You know, if your mum is in that ambulance, it's horrific for you, but that is, again, you know, the human brain is not logical. What the climate protesters are saying is that there are thousands more deaths happening every day in places around the world that are, you know, far away, out of sight, out of mind, and our brains don't always react in logical ways. I feel like I've digressed quite a bit, and I hope this has got a bit of focus. You may have heard some of the things I've already discussed. A couple of other things that kind of went through my head was interesting discussions kind of analysing who he follows on Twitter, Mangione, or, you know, the things he tweeted and how his politics doesn't kind of fit into a box. And I think that's inevitable. I think a lot of us in our 20s kind of go through different phases. I found it kind of interesting how he does fit into a bit of a box of young men kind of into self-optimization and productivity. The last retweet was from Andrew Huberman, and he follows people in that space. And I found it quite funny. He follows some YouTubers that I know, and I'm sure there'll be opinion pieces, and I probably won't speculate on all that now. But I don't know if this whole thing, you know, executing a CEO is indicative of some kind of societal decay beginning, or people being fed up, or whether we'll just forget all about it and move on when the news cycle moves on, when Hawk Tour Girl launches a new crypto coin with Logan Paul, or Jake Paul fights Jay-Z in a Mr. Beast video. Who knows? I think I'll stop there because I have to get to work. But there was one article I read the other day, which was before the apprehension of Mangione, by Gia Tolentino in the New Yorker. And she talked about sort of a lot of the unsavory details of the industry and the insider trading and things like that. But I liked her ending, so I thought I'd just read that. She said, reading this, I thought about the statistic from 2018 that healthcare workers account for 73% of all non-fatal workplace injuries due to violence. Nurses, residents, aides, specialists, they are asked to absorb the rage and panic induced by the American healthcare system, whose private insurers generate billions of dollars in profit and pay executives 8 figures, not despite, but because of the fact that they routinely deny care to desperate people in need. Of course, the solution in the end can't be indifference, not indifference to the death of the CEO and not celebration of it either. But who's going to drop their indifference first? At this point, it's not going to be the people who have a lifetime of evidence that health insurance CEOs do not care about their well-being. Can the CEO class drop its indifference to the suffering and death of ordinary people? Is it possible to do so while achieving record quarterly profits for your stakeholders in perpetuity? And she closed the article talking about the general vibe. I think in New York, she went to a comedy club and somebody cracked a joke about the murder and everybody laughed. And that certainly has been, the kind of vibe online especially. So that's my quick video that really isn't that quick at all. I do apologize for going on too long. As I said, I'm an outside observer. I think if you want an insider perspective, a friend of mine, Dr. Glaucom Flecken, Will Flannery, there are few people better to give you an insight, because he's a doctor in America. He's someone who has had experience of the healthcare system at a young age, because he had cancer and a cardiac arrest, unrelated, if you can believe it, and through no fault of his own. And he is a doctor, and he charts how difficult it is to navigate the hellscape of US healthcare. And I just saw before recording this that he's uploaded thoughts about the situation too, which I haven't watched yet, but I'm sure it will be with his characteristic wit and insight. I think he's just a fantastic person to follow with regard to these. I'm sure if you know me, you know him already. But if you don't, go check out his stuff. The last video I recorded, I said these kind of 2 unplanned videos in quick succession, was looking at sort of how someone like RFK, who's a crank, whose ideas are very bad, comes to the fore, because he claimed that he will change this status quo. And I don't think he will. But it's a quote from his uncle, which I think is quite apt here, which is, I think, something along the lines of, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable, which I thought was a nice way to sort of close this circle. And there was another quote that I read in one of the articles about from Clarence Darrow, which was, I've never celebrated a man's death, but there are some obituaries that I've read with great pleasure. Apologize if I'm paraphrasing there. And I think that sums up a lot of people's sentiments, that they don't want to necessarily celebrate the murder of someone. And to reiterate, that is wrong. But I think that's why we've seen this very unusual response. And I hope that Americans can continue the conversation and vote for real change when you next get a chance. It's the election's only just concluded. But there are other elections, of course. And don't let anybody tell you that healthcare is not a human right. I'm not saying you got to have the most fantastic world-class treatments available for everyone, but the US is the most affluent country in the world, the biggest economy. Healthcare can be afforded as a human right to every citizen, and a good quality of healthcare. And don't let anybody convince you otherwise.